You wake up early. You work all day at a job you hate and don't have time for hobbies or socialization. You survive on ramen noodles and live in a tiny apartment. Meanwhile, the politicians are starting another war to fill their own pockets. You feel powerless. Is this how life is supposed to be? You ask. What if I told you that this wasn't normal for 95% of human history? There was a time when you spent just a few hours hunting and for the rest of the day you explored the wilderness with your friends. You didn't have any boss. Politicians and taxes? There were no such things. So what changed? We started. Life as a hunter-gatherer wasn't perfect. You had a 50% chance of dying at birth. And if you did manage to survive, you could still fall victim to wild animals during your childhood. The environment was harsh, and prey animals could become scarce sometimes. So you were constantly hopping from one place to another to find food. But for the most part, you lived a rich and simple life. You only worked for 4 hours a day and ate nutritious food. Meat, fruits, nuts, and the occasional honey. Then you frolicked beside a pond with your buddies or explored the surrounding wilderness. The world was huge and underpopulated. That's because the hunter-gatherer lifestyle couldn't sustain large numbers of people. When you came across other groups, you exchanged simple tools. Weapons, clothes, and necklaces made from bones. Rarely did you fight a war. And when you did, it was purely out of necessity. Wars were smaller in scale and ended quickly. One person didn't decide to start a war for his own sake. In a hunter-gatherer society, everyone knew one another. Everyone's decision mattered. War was a calculated survival strategy, a last resort. Then something happened. In 3300 BC, a tribe of hunter-gatherers traveled from Anatolia to the east in search of land abundant with game. Following the path of the Euphrates River, they came across a settlement in modern-day Iraq. The people here lived in mud houses and were called the Ubaid people. And unlike the hunter-gatherers, they sustained themselves by growing wheat and barley. As a hunter-gatherer, you only ate grain when you came across it. You didn't plant it for harvest because farming would tie you to one place. But for some reason, these hunter-gatherers decided to stay there and grow their own food as well. Maybe they were enticed by the secure food source that farming allowed. Why travel to distant lands and risk dying from fatigue and wild animals when you can grow food in the ground? Their decision led to the agricultural revolution and the creation of the first civilization in history, the Sumerians. The Sumerians built the first cities, organized religion, and invented the first writing system, the cuneiform. But in return, they sold their freedom. Before the hunter-gatherers moved from Anatolia to Mesopotamia, the Ubaid people were already living there. The Ubaid people practiced agriculture, made textiles, pottery, and beer. But they still hunted like their old ancestors. With the start of the Sumerian civilization around 3000 BC, roughly 5,700 years ago, they became fully agricultural. Farming drastically changed their lives. They started working 10 to 12 hours a day. Their diet was mostly barley bread with some vegetables. This diet stunted their growth and caused various illnesses. Diseases also became rampant as they lived close to domestic animals. Sometimes they starved because the rivers dried up or insects destroyed their crops. Adventure and exploration turned from a daily activity to a thing only possible in stories. But farming allowed them to have a surplus food in terms of grain. That's why their population grew. Soon it created a new problem: scarcity. More people meant less food for everyone. It's ironic how they picked up farming to have a secure source of food, but scarcity just changed its shape. All those extra people just couldn't become farmers as well. So how would they feed themselves? Well, they started doing manual labor or made tools, like sickles, shovels, and knives in exchange for food. Before, they could live off the environment. Now their whole survival depended on the needs of other people. But even after working hard all day, they couldn't afford food that their bodies needed. The large population gave birth to the first cities, so thousands of people had to compete with each other for scraps. You can thank the agricultural revolution for having to apply to 1,000 LinkedIn jobs without getting an interview. The other problem was, some people became more successful than others. Maybe their brains were designed for such an environment. Maybe they knew how to manipulate others without remorse. Maybe they inherited wealth from their ancestors. Once these people became powerful, they rigged the game in their favor. When some people had more land and resources than others, they became in charge of society. They organized labor for digging irrigation canals, built temples where they stored their harvested grain, and collected taxes. The world's first writing system, cuneiform, was invented for the sole purpose of keeping track of payments and grain amounts. These powerful people became responsible for the livelihood of the masses, so the masses obeyed them. A class structure was born. Over time, these people became the ruling elite in the shape of merchants, soldiers, priests called Ensi, or kings called Lugal. They ruled over the city and beyond. You couldn't hunt in the forests anymore because it now belonged to them. Unfortunately, you couldn't even leave for somewhere else without facing the same problems. After Sumer, other agricultural societies popped up in other parts of the world. In Africa, it was the Egyptians. In South Asia, they had the Indus Valley civilization. The Chinese started theirs around the Yellow and Yangtze River. Once humans learned about growing food instead of chasing it, farming was bound to become mainstream. Those remaining hunter-gatherers would either have to join them or face the consequences. Because farming had allowed a group of cunning men to control other humans, they could unleash thousands of humans on others for their own benefits, and they wanted more land and power. At one point, Sumer had 12 independent city-states, each with its own ruler. The average city had a population of 50,000 people. Suppose a drought resulted in a bad harvest. Wouldn't they starve? To fix this problem, the rulers invaded other cities and stole the grain from their temples, or they took the prime farming lands. Wars started either because of resources or more power. Those rulers could not remain satisfied with what they had. They wanted more. All the wars in history, the Greco-Persian Wars, the Punic Wars, the Crusade, the Mongol conquest, the two world wars, they all started for these two reasons. Genocide, slavery, poverty, and destruction, all possible because of farming. The question is, was it worth it? There are pros and cons for both hunter-gatherer societies and agricultural ones. Infant mortality was high in hunter-gatherer societies. There was a high chance of you dying before seeing your 15th birthday. One small injury during hunting could mean death. You constantly moved in search of food. There were no advanced technologies, but you ate a healthy diet and never suffered from diabetes and tooth decay. You had more free time. Your entire world consisted of your close friends and family. You didn't have to listen to a boss, a landlord, or a king. If you didn't like one place, you could always move somewhere else. There were no border guards asking for your passport. Farmers, on the other hand, ate grains and vegetables. If you were a farmer, you were plagued by chronic illness because of the long working hours, poor diet, and living close to livestock. You had to obey your landowner, priest, or king to stay alive. But food was more available. You were safe from wild predators as well. You lived longer. In the end, I think farming was a benefit to our species, but a loss to the individual. The bigger our population, the more chances our species have at surviving. This comes at a cost of personal freedom. You live in a system where someone else dictates your routine. You can't easily move somewhere else, and your worth is tied to how much you can contribute to the system. Meanwhile, those who run the system can play with your life as if you're just a pawn in their chessboard. It's no wonder that some people commit suicide or live with depression because they can't live like their authentic self. I'm not saying civilization isn't great. Civilization allows us to live longer, make art, and explore the universe. But at the same time, it takes away most of what makes us human: freedom and authenticity. Like this video and subscribe to my channel if you want more videos like this.